On this episode of This Week in Linux, we have a ton of distro news to cover with new releases from Linux Mint, Peppermint, EndeavourOS, Feren OS, part of Magic and Alpine Linux. We'll also cover some interesting hardware news for a new Kubuntu branded laptop and a really cool project someone made with taking their business card and doubling it as a Linux computer. We'll also check out a new version of the photography app DarkTable, and later in the show we'll take a look at some unfortunate news with Hyperbola switching to BSD, and also apparently Librem 5 wasn't expensive enough. Fortunately though, Valve is going to help us round out the show with some great news for the Steam Winter Sale. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tennell with the Destination Linux Network, and this is your weekly source for Linux GNews. This episode of This Week in Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, integrated firewalls, load balancers, multiple storage options, and more. You can get all this plus access to their world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month. DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. And these tutorials are also kept up to date in general because, sometimes you find a tutorial and you'll see that it's out of date by a couple years and it's not as useful. They actually have like little notices when they have newer versions. You can just click that to go to the newer version of that tutorial, which is really cool. So if you find it on a search engine, you can still get the latest update information. So that's really awesome. And you can get started on DigitalOcean for 1 month for free with a $50 credit by going to do.co/tux. That's do.co/tux. And with that $50 credit, you can test out multiple droplets, or you could test out one of their big beefy droplets where you can test out really robust software and services on there. And again, you can get started with that $50 credit by going to do.co/tux. Thanks again to DigitalOcean for sponsoring This Week in Linux. First in the show this week is Linux Mint 19.3, codename Tricia. So this is as released, will be supported up until 2023. It's the same thing as based on Ubuntu 18.04, so it has the same support cycle that Ubuntu LTS does. And this one has updates to their system reports because it now includes detection for multiple potential issues on a computer like missing codecs, hardware drive availability, or language packages. They've also improved high DPI support, which is very good for people who have like 4K monitors and that kind of thing. Celluloid now replaces their X player as the default media player, and they state that Celluloid has better performance and hardware acceleration. Now I've never tried Celluloid, but it was previously known as GNOME MPV, and I use the MPV regular one, not the GNOME MPV and the Celluloid, but I use the regular MPV, which is one of the best players I've ever used. It has support for all the different codecs. It is really nice and high performant and has all these different cool functionality options you can use. I've never used this one, so I don't know if this is actually better performant or whatever, but what it is cool about it is that Celluloid has a GUI where MPV doesn't really have one. I mean, it has a pseudo GUI, but doesn't really have one, so you're not going to be able to like launch an application or launch a file from this. You're going to have to like associate the application to files, and then when you launch them, it automatically pulls up MPV. It's a little weird, but at the same time, I think MPVs are a very good thing, so Celluloid probably benefits a lot from having a good backend. They've also replaced Tomboy with Gnote and have replaced GIMP with Drawing for a simpler new user tool. They've actually improved the panel zones, so you can now more easily customize those. And Nemo has more configuration on which actions are available in the context menu, which is nice. It gives you a lot more control as a user. They've also added a hardware detection tool to the BIOS of the ISO images, so it's easier to detect what hardware you have and what you need to install. They've also upgraded to the Linux kernel 5.0, and there are a lot more tweaks and enhancements to this release. So if you're a fan of Mint, then be sure to go check out the latest release because it is quite nice. I actually like the latest version of Cinnamon. It looks a lot more polished than the previous versions. So, good congrats to Linux Mint on that. Though I would say that if you want to check out one of the latest episodes, I'll link to it. I don't remember which number, but I'll link to it in the show notes, which one. But the latest episodes of Destination Linux, we had a discussion about Linux Mint and about how There's some issues in terms of like how they do certain things where I'm not a big fan of, but I do think that Linux Mint is a good distribution. They could just be so much better if they were to fix these issues, and they're not small issues; they're fairly big in some cases. So it's not saying don't use Mint. Mint is still good. It's just if they were to do these, it would be fantastic. So. Anyway, if you want to learn more about that, I'll have a link in the show notes to that episode and also that section of that episode if you want to learn more about that. So yeah, let's go to the next topic. Up next in the show is the Peppermint 10 Respin release. So Peppermint 10 has these once every 2-year releases where they're based on the new LTS, but in between they have these other releases and they call those respins. So this is actually just an update of the existing version where they change a lot of stuff, or even add new utilities and that kind of thing too. And this particular thing is the Peppermint 10 Respin, which is based on 1804 Ubuntu. So it has the same support cycle that Ubuntu has, and long-term support. And it has updates to the kernel for 5.0. It has updates to the Xorg stack through the hardware enablement stack. It has updates to Firefox and many other applications as well. And they've also added some cool stuff like new utilities. So for example, first they've added the cursor resizer utility to the settings panel. And they've added the web browser manager utility, which is really cool because it makes it a lot easier to pick a different browser if you don't like the one that comes by default. And it's just a really simple GUI utility that you can, switch to whatever common browser you prefer to use. So that's a really cool idea. Other distros have that as well, but I think it should be more common that this is available. I think most distros should have that because it's a really cool idea. Also, they've added a modified menu option so that you can use an old, they call it the Peppermint 6 style, which is kind of like the LXDE style, where you can switch out your whisker menu with an old school hierarchical menu, kind of like, back in the day, like Windows 98 kind of stuff, where it was like a very simple, minimal menu system, like that kind of thing. They've also added some the Arc Color GTK themes, which makes it possible to have multicolored themes built on the Arc theme systems, that's pretty cool. And they've also installed pzip full out of the box, making it easier to have able to compress and extract archives for whatever you download. If you've downloaded an archive, it's easier to extract them because it's built into the system now. And they've also added something that's really awesome. I mean, it's also kind of like self-serving a little bit that I'm talking about it, but they have this thing called the ICE system, which allows you to do single site browsers and kind of turn them into take a web app and sort of turn it into like a desktop application sort of through this system. And they've decided to make one for the Destination Linux network, so that is awesome. So you can easily go check out new content and new shows and new everything, all that sort of stuff directly from the main menu of Peppermint 10, which is really awesome to see. So thank you very much for doing that. Fantastic. And if you'd like to check out Peppermint 10 Respin, I'll have a link to it in the show notes below. Up next in the show is EndeavourOS 2019.12.22. It's based on the date. Their release numbers are just the date they released the ISO. And this is a really interesting distribution that we've talked about many times before, and it's because the distribution EndeavourOS is kind of like a successor to the Antergos distribution. I actually used to be a part of the Antergos distribution, so when they decided to kill the project, it was disappointing, but at the same time, pretty much immediately after EndeavourOS was announced, and they decided to continue the mission that Antergos did, but take it in a different direction as well, which is really cool because as soon as I saw that that's what they were doing, I tried to give as much input as possible to see if they could, address the things that I didn't really like about Antergos to maybe make EndeavourOS even better than before, and so far, it is pretty much that. There's still quite a few things to, improve. They have some bugs that they know about and, that kind of thing. But there's so much potential in this distribution that I can't wait to see what happens with it. So if you're not aware, EndeavourOS is based on Arch. And it's kind of like a really easy access to get to Arch while at the same time not modifying too much. Because there are other Arch distributions like Manjaro is an Arch distribution, but Manjaro changes a lot and they fork a lot of packages and stuff like that. So it's not exactly Arch, it's more like it's a derivative of Arch. And Antergos was a distribution that was meant to be really close to Arch. But at the same time, they still modified quite a bit. Now, Endeavour is doing something really interesting where they're making it easy to get to Arch, and they're still making it some modifications and some theming improvements and that kind of thing, and some like polish improvements, but at the same time, they're making it really close to Arch, which is a really interesting approach because it makes it possible for people who are wanting to get, started with Arch, not having to go through this huge, massive barrier that is, being the first time you've ever installed Arch. It can be a little daunting. So this is a really cool thing that they're doing, and this release introduces the new net installer. And now the net installer allows you to choose a DE at the install time, and it allows you to choose from a multitude of different options. So this is really cool. So by default, when they first introduced Endeavour, they were only allowing one distribution or one DE, but they meant to do multiple desktop environments at some point, and that point is now. So if you want to check it out, you can now choose between XFCE, Cinnamon, Mate, LXQt, Plasma, GNOME, Budgie, and Deepin. So there's a lot of options, and they're actually going to be doing more. So they're going to add OpenBox and other tiling window managers in the near future, like i3 and that kind of thing. So this is a really cool thing that is happening, and I can't wait to see what happens with this. They also are working on something that's not really ready yet, but if you want to try it out, you can. They're just not recommending it. But there's this base option for the installation where you can choose to do that, and you just start from like a base Arch level sort of, and then modify and improve things based on your own preferences. So you choose the DE manually, and you choose the configurations manually and all that sort of stuff yourself. So there's a lot of potential with this distribution, and I can't wait to see what happens. And so far, every time I've used it, it's been quite impressive. So I can't wait to try out the net installer. I've tried out some beta versions of it, but not the latest version, so I can't wait to check that out. And I also really like the community around Endeavour because they're like Arch based, but like they're trying to be like a friendly Arch community, because a lot of people have this weird reputation towards Arch. And to be fair, it's partially accurate and partially not. But at the same time, Endeavour is very welcoming and very friendly to beginners. So it's a really good distribution for people who are wanting to get started with Arch, but don't want to go through the big hassle of, all the different intricacies of learning how to use Arch immediately. This way it kind of be like a transition phase for some people as well. So anyway, if you'd like to check out EndeavourOS, the latest ISO release that has the net installer will be linked in the show notes below. Up next in the show is the latest release of another very interesting distribution, and that is Feren OS 2019.12. So Feren OS is a very interesting distribution, especially now because they have changed a lot. So they used to be having Feren OS was based on Cinnamon and also a derivative of Linux Mint. It is no longer based on Linux Mint and no longer using Cinnamon, so that version has been turned into Feren OS Classic, and the new version is based directly on Ubuntu and is using the KDE Plasma desktop environment. So there is quite a few things different in this case, and also a lot of modifications to Plasma itself. So Plasma typically is not modified that much by distributions. I mean, most distributions change a few things here and there, but they don't even change the theme or whatever. It's like 95% the same most of the time. Whereas Kubuntu and Feren OS change stuff, and Kubuntu changes or much more polished area, and not in the sense of like trying new customizations and configurations and things. And Feren OS is a more experimental changes because they change the menu system is a completely different thing. It's not available by default in Plasma. They have modifications to the theming. They have modifications to workflow of various different things. Like they even change stuff in system settings, so it's pretty interesting. So Feren OS is like kind of like an experimental sort of, it's not experimental in the sense of like it's not practically to use it. It's practical to use it. I mean, it's experimental in that they actually try a lot of interesting things in their releases, especially with this newest one where they switch their entire desktop environment. So if you're interested in trying out a unique distribution that is trying new things with Plasma, this is definitely one of those to check out. And this latest version, they have a notice on their blog post where it says one of the most notable tweaks is that the menus have a now dark and transparent design rather than the white and opaque design. And along with Plasma's blur effect, it makes the desktop look a lot more sleek by default, which I totally agree with that. It is a nice looking distribution now. Cinnamon is still good looking. Like Cinnamon was still a good DE, but Plasma allows for a lot more configuration and control to the developer. So it's really cool to see them, trying this thing out with like replacing the DE is a big decision, of course. But what they've done so far, it looks like a good decision. So they've also done some really interesting things in terms of basically Plasma has this thing called the look and feel themes. And the look and feel themes are somewhat limited and somewhat have some issues about what is able to be changed and what isn't. And Feren OS has done custom development for that system to improve their layout switching so that you can now switch your layouts a lot easier thanks to this, because the look and feel system was missing a few things, and it looks like a lot of these have been changed for Feren. And also I'm glad to say that Feren has also pushed up these changes to KDE. They haven't been accepted yet, but at some point hopefully they will be. So in this case, you can do a layout switcher, which allows you to change to a Cupertino layout, which is basically like Mac OS. The Redmond layout, which is like Windows, although they have another version called the Familiar layout, which is more like Windows 10. So it's kind of like Windows 7 versus Windows 10 style. Really interesting. And also the Familiar layout has a menu that looks pretty close to Windows 10. So it's impressive that someone else made this, and it was just like, when I saw that, I was like, wow, that looks a lot like Windows 10. That's interesting. So you could pretty much make it exact copy, as far as design-wise, if you wanted to. So it's pretty interesting. And they also have their own custom stuff, as well as the Ubuntu Unity layout for those who want to, go back to the Unity style. And they also have one called a tablet mode, which is pretty cool because it's similar to the default one, but it makes the panel a little bit bigger, and it adds a virtual keyboard button on the panel. So if you have, if you have it on a tablet, it makes it a lot easier to use your system that way. So that's really cool too. And another thing that they've done where they've created a lot of interesting things for being such a small project. They have a lot of cool stuff. One of the things, I've never tested this, and because I don't know how well this works, but if it works well, this is a massive value to the community, and people who are making other distros probably should check this out, because they have something called the transfer tool, and the transfer tool allows you to take settings and files from your existing installation and move it to Feren OS. Now, this supports other Linux distributions, but it also supports Windows. I don't know how or what exactly it's taking from Windows, but you can take files and settings from your Windows machine and move it over to your Feren OS system pretty simply. You basically just load up this application, choose the drive that has your Windows system on it, choose what settings you want, and then it creates like a package sort of. And then when you go to your other system, you take that package, it puts it on another drive. So you have to have two drives in order to do this, but it would work with, theoretically, it would work with a flash drive, depending on how big that data is. And then you just go back to the new version of Feren, you can go back to your Feren OS install, and then you can import those settings from that separate drive that you did. And it's really interesting because it looks like a very seamless thing to do, and it also like moves in wallpapers and all kinds of stuff like that. So I haven't really done testing because I don't have a Windows set up to see that, but based on the video demonstration they made, it's pretty cool. It has a lot of potential. So other distributions should probably check that out if they haven't already. If you would like to check out Feren OS, I have a link to the latest release of 2019.12 in the show notes below. Up next in the show is Parted Magic 2019_12_24. They actually do use underscores in their versioning numbers. But anyway, so Parted Magic is a really cool distribution that is basically it's kind of like a complete disk management solution for disk partitioning, data rescue, disk erasing, benchmarking, disk cloning, and so many other things. It's probably one of the best solutions for that kind of thing available, and it is very powerful. So if you do any kind of like sysadmin work or any kind of tech support, this is one of the distributions that you should have available to you at all times doing that stuff, because it is that important and that valuable. So also, this latest version has now added support for Wine, GNOME Disk Utility, DOSBox, and a new method of booting via PXE or PXE, which is also a pre-boot execution environment, which allows for booting over a network. So this is pretty cool, and the latest version has added a lot of cool stuff. And if you are interested in checking out Parted Magic, I'll have a link to the latest version of 2019_12_24 in the show notes below. Up next in the show is Alpine Linux 3.11. So Alpine Linux is a security-oriented, lightweight Linux distribution built around the Muscle libc library and the BusyBox. And this makes it smaller and more resource efficient than traditional GNU/Linux distributions. And in fact, they say that you can have Alpine Linux inside of a container with just 8 megabytes of storage, and a minimal installation to disk requires only around 130 megabytes of storage. So this is a ridiculously lightweight distribution while still being quite powerful, because they have their own custom structure of their own packaging and that kind of thing. So Alpine Linux, this latest update at 3.11, has Linux kernel 5.4 LTS, and it has support for the Raspberry Pi 4 now. So if you have any usage for having like an embedded system for the Raspberry Pi, this might be a really good one to check out. It also added support for initial support for GNOME and KDE environments on top of Alpine. They've added support for Vulkan, DXVK, and Mini GW W64 support. They've actually also added Rust is now available for all the architectures except for the S390X architecture, but for everything else, the Rust programming language is available. And they've also deprecated Python 2, which makes sense. I mean, every distribution should get rid of Python 2 because most things have been migrated to Python 3 at this point, and those that haven't, it's been like a decade now, so probably should get on that. Anyway, so Alpine Linux 3.11 is a really interesting distribution, like a lot of the rest of the ones in this episode. So if you want to check out a security-oriented, lightweight Linux distribution, then check out Alpine Linux 3.11, link in the show notes. Up next in the show is the housekeeping section. And in this section, I normally tell you about things that you may not be aware of the show, but for those who are aware, you might skip this section. But in this particular episode, I'm going to let you know about things, well, that as well, but also things that we're going to be doing for the next year. So in 2020, we're going to be doing 2 special edition episodes, pretty quickly actually, but 2 special edition episodes. One, we're going to do a look back of the past year's topics. So it'd be This Year in Linux 2019, and it'd be the first ever This Year in Linux. And I wanted people to contribute if they would like to, and so I created a thread for this and the other special edition episode on the Destination Linux Network forum. So you can go to destinationlinux.network, click on the forum link, and you'll find links for these threads. I also realize that's a lot of where to find it, so I made a special direct links on the description and in the show notes so that you can just quickly go to these threads without much effort. And so, as I said, This Year in Linux episode will be a look back at all the things that happened in this past year, but it's not going to be like taking previous episodes and just editing them together. It's going to be a retrospective style where we talk about the things like the biggest topics, but also let you know about where we are since those were covered and what has changed since then. So that's a lot of effort and a lot of stuff to do, so if you would like to contribute, I would very much appreciate that, like picking the biggest topics and that sort of thing. And also, I decided that that's not enough effort for me, so we're going to do 10 times that with the This Decade in Linux episode. So if you'd like to contribute to that as well, I would appreciate that very much too. So we're going to talk about all the things that happened in the past decade, which is a huge amount of things and some really big stuff like Unity being created and being canceled, Proton being created, Systemd being created. All these other things happened in the course of that 10 years. So there's a lot to cover on that. And if you'd like to help pick out what we cover, I would very much appreciate that. You can just go to the links that are in the description and the show notes to those direct threads for This Year in Linux and This Decade in Linux. And if you'd like to contribute in another way, you could become a patron, but to help this show be created, because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. A lot of people don't, understand how much effort is, because I think they look at how long the episodes are and think it only takes that long. It doesn't. The shows are usually like 35 to 45 minutes long or whatever, but the actual time it takes to make the show is around 20 to 30 hours because, well, there's just a lot of prep work, there's a lot of actual recording, and then there's a bunch of editing time and all this other stuff. So lots of time is put into the show, and if you appreciate that, then if you would like, you can maybe become a patron by helping out make this show possible so that I can devote more time to the show, and I would appreciate that heavily. And if you would like to do so, you can go to TuxDigital.com/Patreon or TuxDigital.com/Sponsus to become a patron. And also, because you appreciate me by doing so, I also will be giving you a bunch of bonuses. So like you get like special rewards by becoming a patron if you were to do so. So there you go, more incentive to do it, and I would very much appreciate it if you were to do so. But you can also contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links by going to TuxDigital.com/affiliates. I will link in that in the show notes as well, so that you can help this channel out without having to do anything extra. You could just, if you're going to buy something on Amazon, you just click that link, buy it then, and that helps the show. So there's another option. And also, just so you know, we got some other things that you may not be aware of, like the segment index. I have a link in the show notes and in the description for all the different sections of the show and all the different topics of the show. And I do this every episode. So you can just click directly to the timestamp of an individual topic and go right to it, so that you can jump around, pick and choose which topics you want to do in what order. Because if maybe my order is not what you prefer, so you could pick whatever order you want, and be sure to check out all the different topics, because you can do it at any time you want. And if you like to have an audio version, you can subscribe to the audio feed, which is an RSS feed that you can subscribe, and it's also available in podcatchers, so you can do like Podcast Addict or Pocket Cast or whatever you want, and just search for the show in those and be able to subscribe that way. So if you would just like to listen while you're commuting or something, that's also an option as well. And if you'd like to join the community, we have many ways to do so. In fact, we have the Telegram group. You can go to destinationlinux.network/Telegram to join one of the biggest Telegram groups for Linux there is. It has over 1,100 people in it, so be sure to join that, because there's a lot of great conversations. And if you like real time anyway, and if you want to have a more organized style of conversation, you can go to the Destination Linux Network Forum by going to destinationlinux.network, clicking on the forum link, and you can get all the stuff there. Have tons of different discussions about various different shows, or just in general, because there's a lot of great stuff, including everybody there is really welcoming, and it's a really great community. So be sure to check it out. Destinationlinux.network, click on the forum link, and there we go. So let's move on to the rest of the show, and be sure to remember to go to the forum to click on the links for the different threads for this year in Linux and this decade in Linux if you'd like to contribute to those shows. Up next in the show is the latest release of the DarkTable 3.0. And this actually has a really big release for 3.0. It's a big major version release, and they've changed a lot, including a complete rework of their graphical user interface. So if you're not aware, DarkTable is a very popular open source alternative to Adobe Lightroom, which allows you to take raw photos and be able to manipulate them in whatever style you want to do it. It's like that has like enhancement tools, sharpening tools, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily a manipulation program like something like Photoshop would be. It's more of an enhancement and improvement thing to existing files that you can do for a photographer. There's also a lot of stuff in this latest release that we're going to get to. This release includes over 3,000 commits, so it's a big update and packs a full interface overhaul. So there's new shortcuts that have been introduced to quickly collapse borders, sidebars, histograms, and navigational modules, allowing it to be basically a borderless editing experience. They have a new color profile system. They have an improved support for displays up to 5K. They have improved the window display, or the preview window display. They have tone equalizers been added, denoising enhancements have been done, color picker improvements, and a whole load of other things that you can do to, improve your photos and various different things and various different, like DarkTable is a really cool application, and I'm not really that versed into photography, so I've only dabbled with it. I don't really know exactly how good it is, but I have heard debates that not even just Linux users, but just photographers in general have debated whether or not DarkTable is equal to Lightroom or not. And there's been a lot of places people will say that Darkroom or DarkTable is pretty close. And, well, I'll take their word for it. I don't know, but it does look like a pretty powerful application. So if you are into photography, definitely check out DarkTable 3.0. Link in the show notes. Up next in the show is the Kubuntu Focus Linux laptop. So the Kubuntu Council has announced a partnership with the Mindshare Management and Tuxedo Computers to bring a high-spec laptop to the market featuring the Kubuntu Linux distribution. In the announcement, they state the target audience is power users and developers with a suite of applications that will come preloaded and updated for everything from Steam games, deep learning software, web development software, image editing, and more. The hardware was said to be meticulously vetted and tested, so everything works flawlessly out of the box with Kubuntu, which is fantastic in general. Having people putting that effort into those computers, which is typically done with Tuxedo as well, because they are a Linux-based computer company. But it's also great to see that they're doing it extensive with Kubuntu. The specs of the computer are Core i7-9750H. I'm not really sure how good that is because I don't pay attention to the Intel computers anymore, or Intel processors. However, the i7 is one of their powerful ones, so that's awesome. The GPU has a 6 gig of RAM. GTX 2060 has 32 gigs of RAM overall. So 6 gig of RAM is the GPU's RAM. Then the actual computer's RAM is DDR4 32 gigs of RAM, which is quite good, and especially in a laptop. The storage available is a 1 terabyte Samsung 970 EVO Plus NVMe. So that's a pretty powerful thing for coming by default. They also have a 16.1 matte 1080p IPS display, so it's got really good viewing angles. They also have it's metal and plastic based chassis and some other things like being able to be user expandable for SSD and NVMe and the RAM. So you can, if 32 gigs of RAM is not enough for you and 1 terabyte NVMe is not enough for you, you could improve those and add extra whatever. Anyway. So this seems to be a very similar thing the way that System 76 is done, where they have a manufactured computer based on Clevo, and then they do optimizations for Linux and modifications and stuff to make sure everything is tested well and works well and all that kind of stuff. And it also includes some nice branding for Kubuntu, including a Kubuntu logo on the super key, which is always nice to see it no longer being a Windows key, because that's not good. But this, having a Kubuntu logo, that's very good. So there's also no word on the price yet for the laptop, and we don't know when it's going to actually be able to be ordered. So if you're in the market for the new laptop, you might need to wait a little bit and hold out for this one, because we don't know exactly what it's going to cost or when it's going to happen, because it was kind of like, I don't know, they kind of announced this before it seemed to be ready to announce it, because the pre-orders are not available yet. But as soon as they are, I think it would be a really good option for people who are, developers or power users and that kind of thing, who are fans of Kubuntu, like myself. I like Kubuntu. So this looks like a really cool laptop. So if you're in the market for something like this, you can find out more at kubuntu.org, and I'll have a link to their announcement in the show notes below. But unfortunately, we don't know much other than that about it or when you can get it. So whenever they announce that information, I will let you know about that. So let's move on to the next topic. So up next in the show, we're going to talk about some business cards. And I know you might be thinking, what? Well, this particular business card runs Linux. And it is the card for George Hilliard. He is an embedded systems engineer, and he has turned his business card into not only a business card, but also it is a bootable Linux system. So it has the basic stuff like a name, email address, and that sort of thing, but also has a USB plug that you can plug into your computer and boot a super stripped down Linux in about 6 seconds. But he says that due to the form factor and cost, the card lacks I/O, networking, and any amount of storage to run heavyweight programs, but it does have some storage. So he says if you want to plug it in, you can plug it in as a traditional flash drive, and it will contain a README file that explains the card, a copy of George's resume or CV if you're not in the U.S., some photos, a couple of games, and a few utilities, and even some free space should the recipient want to save something to the card for some reason. And what's really cool about this, I mean, this is already super cool, but he also was able to make these cards cost less than $3. So like him creating a business card that has a Linux computer built into the card only costs about $3, a little bit less than $3. That's crazy. I mean, that's awesome. And it makes a lot of sense that an embedded systems engineer would have a business card that is also a computer or an embedded computer. So that's pretty awesome. But of course, another reason why this is awesome is because it is open source. So the source code, the schematics, and all the other relevant information is available on his website. So you can download and make your own if you want to, because why not? Anyway, this is awesome. And another special thing that it's not really that important, and I just like to point it out because to me, as a marketer and networking guy, business networking, this is a standard business card size computer. That is important because anytime you go to a networking thing and someone gives you a non-standard business card, that is my cue to throw it away because they care so little about the person they're giving it to. They're making it awkward for them to actually have it. So, because most of the time when you have like business card binders and stuff, they will be based on the standard. Or, for example, fitting in a wallet. I've had people give me like 4-inch square cards. Like, what is this? I'm throwing this away because there's no way for me to save it. So and not only is it a really cool business card that it has a Linux computer in it, it's also a standard size business card, which I appreciate that too. So that was a weird random tangent on a not very important thing. But what is the other time I'm ever going to talk about business cards and networking and stuff like that? But very cool. A business card that runs Linux. I want one. Even if it's just getting George's card, I want one. Up next in the show is a topic that I have been trying to record for the past hour or so because I don't really want to be negative. I don't want to bash a company. That's just not what I do on this show. I don't like doing that. I try to be positive and only cover topics that I find interesting or I think you will find interesting or I just think is cool or whatever. Hence that business card with Linux computer. That's really cool, even if it is ridiculous. It's awesome, It's awesome in its ridiculousness, whatever. But then we go into the opposite side, and that's purism, where the ridiculousness is frustrating and nonsensical and just so annoying. So, I've tried to do this topic multiple times. This is the last attempt, hopefully, anyway. And the reason why is because they've announced 2 new things, and those 2 things, neither one are good. And it's just frustrating. So, let's get into it really quickly. They announced Librem 5 phone will be having a price hike. And that there's a new Librem server product that they haven't even finished their other products, but hey, new product, let's do that. Let's spread our lack of management skill even further. So, they had a phone that was $699, that was 5.7-inch, 720 by 1440 resolution, 3 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of storage. The price for that phone is now going to be increased to $749, and then later again at $799, and the difference between the hardware is nothing. That doesn't even consider the fact that they announced a USA version of their phone being assembled in the USA, even though they haven't finished the first one. They're going to make another one, and that one's going to cost $2,000. With the only difference of where it's supposedly where the parts are origined and where it's being assembled. That's the only difference. But they haven't even finished the first one yet. And then the Librem 5 is accompanied with the Librem server announcement that they're going to make another product with servers. And these servers are going to start at $2,700 up to $6,000. And this is not necessarily that price is not necessarily ridiculous. It's just you haven't finished your other products and you're adding another one. I don't think an enterprise company is going to remotely consider that. because you don't have a very good track record, to say the least. I'll go to the history in a second. But before we move on, to why. Because, by the way, I know people are going to hate on me for having this critical opinion of Librem and the Purism stuff. And it's because, for some reason, the ideology allows some people to justify, apologizing for Purism all the time and basically pretending like they're impervious to criticism. I don't know where this comes from. But it is a thing. And a majority of people who watch this show would agree with me that Purism is problematic at best. And that's not who I'm talking to about that. There's people who have opinions that are like, we could be nicer to them about, they are making something that didn't exist prior to them starting doing this. And you're like, yeah, sure, that's cool. Although it didn't really accomplish it. They never got to it yet, so I'm still not going to apologize for that. Then there's also people who said that, well, they're making a whole operating system by themselves and stuff, and it's like, yeah, they shouldn't have, because there already existed other options at the time, so whatever. We'll get to the whole rant in a minute, but let's get to the Librem server part, because that's the other announcement that's recent, and that announcement is that they're making a new server. I already told you the price, but they have something that kind of annoying. They make a statement saying that is already successful. So here's this, and I quote, Librem server has already been successfully in use by established business customers for the past year that serve important clients such as Boeing, GE, NASA, and Toyota. Now the company is opening up the product to general availability, end quote. That's interesting that they name-dropped Boeing, GE, NASA, and Toyota. Not for the reason that it seems like it's interesting. It's not because those companies are actually their clients or customers. No. It's because they say it's already successfully been in use by established business customers for the past year that serve important clients such as Boeing, GE, NASA, and Toyota, meaning that those important clients are the clients of their clients. So not actually things that they should be name dropping because, well, it's not their clients. So it's this weird misleading marketing spin thing that they do that also annoys me. And they do this all the time. Like, the Librem 5 is shipped, everybody. Yay, us. Except we didn't ship it because, one, we didn't ship it to anybody but our employees. And two, the phone still doesn't even work anyway. So if we did ship it, it wouldn't work regardless. So we didn't actually meet it. That's what they said, provided you take out all the parts where I corrected them. They said that they shipped it, but they didn't. So it's just frustrating, okay? I wish I could support this company because I want to. I want to pay a premium for a device that is focused on privacy and security and Linux and open source. I'm okay with the premium. That's not the problem. The problem is the fact that the premium is so high and the honesty is so low. So this problem with Purism, it goes back to the history of this company. By the way, first of all, just to clarify something else, the servers, there's already a competitor that has open source and transparent servers that are opened down to the microcode and firmware level. And those would be from Raptor Computing Systems that have Power 9 Talos 2 servers. So like those are already doing what Librem server claims to be and has already been around for a while and has built a reputation versus Librem and Purism that has a reputation of not fulfilling their promises. So for those companies looking for using that, check those out instead. And the next thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that Purism has done multiple crowdfunders. So we're going to go back to a history of this. So we're in the rant form now. We've talked about the server and the price hike of the phone. We're now in I don't remember all the things that I've said so far because I've done this multiple times and I've covered multiple things. So I'm just going to, whatever. They did the USA version where the origin of the hardware is not from the existing one. And the price is going to be $2,000, even though they haven't finished the phone in the first place. If I said that already, I'm sorry, but I don't remember because it's all blurred together now. The next thing is the history of Purism. So Purism has done crowdfunding all the time, really. So the first device, the first product they ever announced was the Librem 15 or 13. I don't remember which one, but they were like a month apart from each other, so whichever. Then the next one that they did was another crowdfunder. So they did, in total, both of those laptops were crowdfunded for a total about $1.12 whatever, million. And then they don't make the laptop on time. They don't make it to the specs that they say they will. They don't make it with the features that they say they will. Like the open firmware stuff that they claimed didn't happen for a year after their release of it. And the reviews for that laptop was just very bad, very bad. And after that, they thought, well, we didn't finish our laptop, so let's go ahead and make a tablet. So they crowdfunded a tablet, which did not get successful. And I guess enough time had passed that people forgot how bad the laptops were and forgot that the tablet was a failure. And when they got to the phone part, and I put myself in that thing as well. I forgot about the tablet until I started researching for this thing. And it had rose tinted glasses on. Hey, this company's still around. That's great. Maybe they've learned their lesson from the laptops. No, they didn't. So they make a phone. They announced the phone is going to be released in January 2019. It didn't happen. And like I said, they said in April 2019 it was going to be, and it didn't happen. Then they did the whole we shipped and we didn't actually thing. I don't know. It's just frustrating. I should make a video about this, but I know I'm going to get so much hate on it. So maybe that's why I haven't. But if you want to find out all the details about why the company is problematic, let me know, and I will break it down exactly. Like, hey, I want to support Purism, but I just can't with a clean conscience do that because they constantly do this nonsense. And the fact that people have like this weird, that Purism gets defended in the fact that they're making this hardware, even though the hardware is not very good, and even the ones that they completed is still not very good. And even when people they ship it to have like massive problems where the certain stuff short circuit, or the battery is super fast draining, or it can't make phone calls and all this other stuff, and they still defend it because or whatever. I don't know. And I understand if they actually said it was beta phones and they said it was developer edition and all that, I could understand that. But they don't say that stuff, and they haven't ever that I know of. It's so frustrating. Okay? It's just frustrating. But if you want me to go into the super details more so than I have here, please let me know in the comments below or on the Destination Linux Network forum. I would be happy to do so. But I think this is probably the last time I'm going to talk about it in the show because this is just such a frustrating topic to ever cover. Anyway, by the way, some people argue that they should be okay. It's okay because they're making their own operating system, but why are they making their own operating system? I'm not sure if I said this already either, but they're making their own operating system, but there already existed operating systems. Now you could argue that a distro is different. Because people say that the same thing about distros on laptops and stuff, but that's different because there's a lot less work to do. Whereas on the mobile version, they didn't decide to just make their own version of an OS. They didn't just take an existing one. They decided, I'm going to make this whole brand new thing, including a whole new shell, a whole new toolkit, because they want to use a particular toolkit that was not meant for mobile instead of using one that was. They want to use a particular shell or desktop environment, or whatever you want to call it, mobile environment, that was not meant for mobile, but they want to do it anyway. So it's just, by the way, that's GTK and GNOME shell. So GNOME did not make a mobile phone version because they don't want to, which is totally reasonable if they don't want to. It's fine. It's their thing. They want to make a desktop one, cool, do it. But Purism wanted to make one with GNOME, so they forked it and made their own called Phosh, which is phone shell or whatever. Then they fork the GTK toolkit to make their own version, which is like, what is going on here? And their reason for doing it is because they want their phone interface to be similar to, or convergent or whatever with their desktop interface or laptop interface. And it's like, hey, here's a thought: change the laptop instead, because that would be a lot easier to do. But no, we're going to take $2 point something million from the community and waste it on doing things that we don't need to do because that's the thing that we have to do for our own preference. Yeah, I'm going to get a lot of hate on this one. But on the bright side. So we're going to switch gears from the super frustrating to slightly unfortunate. There's a distribution called Hyperbola. I think that's how you say it. I'm not totally sure. And they're switching from Linux to BSD. And they say that user freedom is the concerns that why they're doing it. They say this was not an easy decision to make, but we wish we use our time and resources to create a viable alternative to the current operating system trends, which are actively seeking to undermine user choice and freedom. Now, this is pretty interesting, especially considering that Project Trident, which was based on BSD in the past, had this recently decided to switch over, or was it TrueOS? I'm not sure. I think it was, either way, TrueOS, Project Trident, one of the two, decided to go from BSD to Linux instead, which I thought was really interesting, and this is going the reverse. And the reason they're also giving is that they're saying that their concerns go far beyond that, saying that this will not be a distro of BSD, but really be a fork of OpenBSD kernel with modifications to various different things like user space and etc. And they say that the Linux kernel is forcing adoption of DRM, including HDCP. I don't know if that's accurate or not. Linux kernel proposed usage of Rust, which contains freedom flaws, and centralized code repository. Centralized code repository is not necessarily a bad thing. And freedom flaws, I don't know exactly what that means. The Linux kernel being written without security in mind, which that doesn't make any sense because it was fundamentally pieced up. Anyway, they say that also many GNU user space and core utilities are all forcing adoption of features without build time options to disable them, like Pulse Audio, Systemd, Rust, Java, and etc. So I don't know how much of this is accurate, but if you're interested in learning more, I'll have a link in the show notes. And because I still think this is pretty interesting, in comparison to the thing that TrueOS or Project Trident or whatever are doing when they're switching to Linux and this is switching to BSD. I think this is a really interesting thing. And whenever they have a new one coming out, that's the Hyperbola BSD version, I will check it out because I'm just interested in seeing what they're going to do with this. So if you're interested as well, I'll have a link in the show notes below to check it out. The last topic of the show is going to round out the show with some really fun, not only fun news in the fact that it's just good news, but fun because it's game-based. And that is Valve Steam Winter Sale is currently on, and it's only going to be a couple more days left, so be sure to go check it out because there's a lot of great games that are available, like The Witcher 2 Assassin's Creed Enhanced Edition is 85% off, Stardew Valley is 40% off, Stellaris is 75% off, Total War Warhammer 2 is 66% off, Sid Meier's Civilization 6 is 75% off, and Rocket League is 50% off, and I'm a big fan of Rocket League, as most people know that. But there's definitely a lot of games that are available, so go check those out. And to make it super easy, I'll have a link in the description and in the show notes that will take you directly to the Steam sale that has all the games on discount for compatibility with Linux. Now, this is only native Linux, so if you are looking for Proton-based games, there's not really a way to do that right now, but hopefully in the future there'll be a way to do that. But right now, if you want, go to destinationlinux.network/Steam sale, and you'll be taken directly to a search results that show games on discount that are for Linux. And yeah, so thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the TuxDigital channel, we have multiple ways you can contribute via PayPal, Patreon, Sponsus, and many others. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere. This is a t-shirt that I designed to basically to explain that even if you don't know that Linux is there, it probably is. That's why Tux is blended in the background to convey that message and also to just basically be an awesome looking shirt. So if you'd like to check that out, go to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere, or if you're in Europe, you can go to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere EU for shipping inside of Europe. And we also have ways to contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links. You can find links for places like Private Internet Access, Amazon, Humble Bundle, and many more by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. If you'd like some more podcasting goodness from me, then check out the latest episode of Destination Linux, as I'm a co-host of that show. And also be sure to check out the Destination Linux Network by going to destinationlinux.network, and you can find all the great content that's available there, as well as join the forum that is available there by clicking on the forum link or going to discourse.destinationlinux.network. There's a lot of great discussions there, as well as all the creators are on that platform as well, so you can get in touch with us that way if you would like to. And yes, please join the forum. I think it's an awesome piece of the community, and the more people that's on it, the better it gets. So check that out. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'm Michael Tennell with the Destination Linux Network and TuxDigital. And as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.